Good morning, and my name is Daniel Kerner. I lead Eurasia Cross Latin America team. I'm going to have to do this in English because my Portuguese is bad, and so I won't subject you to that. And the idea now is to shift our focus to Mexico. I'm very grateful to have Undersecretary Gabriel Yorio, who has been very gracious in waking up very early in Mexico time to be with us. We have a full room of investors here in Brazil, very interested in Mexico, and Gabriel, is one of the most experienced and I think sharpest policymakers in Mexico. So thank you very much for being with us. So let me go right into it. One of the conversations we're having here is try to understand the uncertain global environment that we're facing it on the geopolitical level, on the economic level. You've been in office in normal times, pandemic times, inflation times. You've seen it all. So in this context of high uncertainty around the world, but also with potentially the prospects for a better outlook in Latin America, how are you seeing the prospects for Mexico in the next year or so?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. I believe, or I trust you hear me. So, bom dia para
Perfect.
também português, mas eu acho que eu vou terminar falando portunhol. So I will speak in English. No, let me just jump into the economic growth issue. Mexico has been growing in between 3 and 4% after COVID-19 in 2020. Right now, what we are expecting is that Mexico's growth is going to be around 3% this year. And potentially, we can have some moderation of growth for next year, now depending if there is some U.S. recession or not. But let me get into some details just to give you a glimpse of why we are growing in Mexico in between 3 and 4%. Mainly, we conducted several reforms that are focused on labor and also, labor reforms between 2020 and 2022, specifically eliminating, for example, the outsourcing or some abuses related to outsourcing. Second, we did a major pension reform in 2020 as well, that is increasing savings in the retirement system from 14% of GDP to 40%, or is expected to increase to 40% of GDP in 10 years. It's going to start being implementing this year. And also we have been increasing minimum wage for during these 5 years in this administration. And this has been strengthening internal consumption in Mexico. There are some different characteristics when you compare COVID-19 crisis with other crises that we have faced before, specifically on the great financial crisis in 2009, when we had a sharp depreciation of the Mexican peso, and also we have to conduct several fiscal reforms in order to equilibrate fiscal balances. Just to put in context for the audience, on previous recession, we have to increase the VAT and we have to increase the income tax. In this occasion, we didn't make any fiscal reform. Practically, we did another kind of measures in order to keep the expenditure tight. So we didn't actually did any expenditure cut in 2020. So it has been reflecting in a strong internal consumption in Mexico, something that wasn't the case in previous economic stress events. Also, there is a difference in the recovery that we are experiencing this time. Our currency is actually appreciating. At the beginning of the administration, the dollar was around 18 pesos per dollar. Right now, it's almost 17. So exports are not one of the main drivers of this export. Still, export has been increasing, especially to United States. Also, Mexico is benefiting from the nearshoring trend. All these geopolitical tensions between United States and some countries in Asia has been pushing some firms to relocate in Latin America. Mexico has some specific characteristics that practically make the country to benefit a lot from this trend. This is in terms of growth. In terms of inflation, we reached the peak of inflation last year between August and September. We almost reached 8.7% of inflation. we conducted several actions in order to contain this price increase. Specifically, we provided subsidies to the gasoline. 60% of all the merchandise in Mexico is transport through roads. So gasoline was one of the main drivers of main contention measures for inflation. And also we conducted another supply side actions. For example, facilitating international trade, reducing barriers, etc. But also monetary policy has been very active. Our central bank started early in the cycle, actually before the Fed. And right now we have a reference rate of around 11.25% of reference rate. We are estimating that real rates is going to be increasing on the next month because inflation is already coming down. What we're expecting is that by the end of the year, inflation will be around 5%, maybe lower because right now we have already 5.2%. So in terms of economic growth and inflation and economic fundamentals, Mexico remains solid in that regard. So now there are some specific debates about if either the United States is going to be entering a recession or not, if there are some events in terms of the financial sector in the United States that potentially can affect growth at the global scale or also to impact Mexico. But we're very positive and confident that this year we're going to be growing as well as around 3%. Actually, growth in Mexico accelerated on the first quarter. We almost reached one percentage point increase in growth in the first quarter. And with all the information that we have right now, we have an economic growth floor of around 2.7%. So we are very confident that we are going to have a 3% growth for 2023. Practically, we already recovered all the pre-pandemic levels in all our economic indicators. Stability is strong in Mexico, not only financial stability, economic, but also social. So maybe let me stop here because I know there's other questions.
No, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And maybe building up on that, one of the things that we were discussing in the panel before, but that has really characterized or distinguished Mexico from almost many other Latin American countries and even emerging markets has been a very high degree of fiscal discipline and fiscal stability. So in that sense, as we enter into the last year of this administration's, what are your views or plans, or how are you seeing the fiscal accounts evolving?
I don't hear anything, so...
Can you hear me now? Okay, excellent.
I didn't hear you.
Okay, great. So I was saying that one of the things that has been very distinguishing of Mexico and very appreciated by foreign investors has been the very strong degree of fiscal discipline and the strong fiscal accounts that Mexico has had over the years, but particularly under this administration. So as we enter the last year of this administration, how are you seeing the fiscal accounts? What are the plans, if any, or any changes, or how are you seeing it evolving for the next year?
No, practically we don't have a change of the policy that we have been conducted for these 5 years. When we started this administration at the beginning, we established 2 specific fiscal policies. The first one was we're going to have positive primary balances, and the second one, debt to GDP ratio should remain stable. We were coming from previous administrations from a debt to GDP ratio path that practically was rapidly increasing. So just to put in context, at the beginning of the administration, early in the administration, the debt to GDP ratio was around 45%. Right now, it's around 50%. It is because of the impact of COVID. In 2020, the Mexican peso went from 18 pesos per dollar to 25 pesos per dollar, and that had an evaluation effect on our external debt. But also GDP, growth was minus 8.2%. So the debt to GDP ratio was increased up to 52%. But we didn't take more debt that was previously approved by Congress without having in mind that we were going to be facing the COVID-19. Now, we had been able to reduce debt to GDP from 52% to 50% at this point. Last year, we conducted a medium-term fiscal framework that we presented to the president. So we do agree in the trajectory of the debt to GDP towards the end of the administration to remain in 50%, and that will be the main policy. And primary balances were positive even in 2020. However, we allow some deterioration in the primary balances in 2021 and 2022. Our largest primary balance deficit was last year when we reached minus 0.5% of primary balance. So it's very close to 0%. And to put it in context, previous administration almost reached 2% of minus 2%. So what we are expecting this year is primary balance is going to be very close to zero. And then we might be entering in a consolidation phase for the last year of the administration. So fiscal prudency will remain one of our main commitments for this administration. Let me, because of the macro fiscal numbers, we have been perceived well, but there's some detail of what we are doing in fiscal terms. During this administration, practically, we managed to increase public investment as well. Usually, there was a belief that when you increase the social protection network expenditure, you need to sacrifice public expenditure, and that wasn't the case in this administration. We have been able to increase both by doing by taking some measures or fiscal management measures on the expenditure side, and this has been achieved without actually issuing more debt. So our deficits are anchored at 50% of GDP. What we're not planning to have a fiscal reform. At the beginning, the president was kind of opened, or at least he established that for the first half of the administration, he shouldn't pursue a fiscal reform. And we might evaluate that on the second half. But at this time, given the fiscal stance and also the fiscal outcomes, we don't foresee any need to pursue a fiscal reform, and we won't do it on the last year of the administration. As we are entering this highly political environment in Mexico, I would like to say that for the next administration, fiscal balances are going to will remain strong. And I guess the major legacy of the Ministry of Finance, Rogelio Ramirez de la O, is that next administration's finances or transition team could debate about what could be potential changes in the fiscal structure without actually rushing fiscal reform to equilibrate fiscal aggregates. Let me just also put in context that during this administration, we conducted tax administration measures. So we didn't increase tax rates, but what we did was to increase tax evasion. We fight tax evasion, elusion, and also fraud. The results of these policies practically are equivalent to a fiscal reform. We managed to increase tax revenues collection from 12.5% of GDP to almost 14.7% of GDP. And that means around 1.4, 1.6 percentage points of increase in tax collection just by fighting evasion. Mexico is an OECD country. So when we compare to OECD country, we have high tax rates, but we have low tax collection compared also with Latin American countries. So we're lagging behind. There's still a space that we can take benefit in increasing our revenues and strengthening our revenues without actually pursuing a fiscal reform and increasing the tax burden on the economy. But maybe allow me to stop here.
Oh, excellent. Thank you very much. And I guess continuing on that, one of the main questions always on the fiscal side, but also on the growth and investment side is energy and specifically Pemex. And so how are you thinking about Pemex as in terms of both its investments, but particularly its financial management and its financial situation, also as we enter the last year of the administration?
Yeah, sure. And well, Pemex is always an issue. Since I started here in the position in the Ministry of Finance, Pemex is the largest fiscal contingency for the Mexican government, and you all know that it's highly interlinked with our credit rating, with the sovereign credit rating. Maybe just to provide some quick context to the audience, the SOE, early in the administration, we have an SOE that practically was increasing its debt. Practically, it doubled in the last decade. and revenues, and also, I mean, oil reserves practically were cut by half. So there's when you compare Pemex with other oil firms, it compares well in every financial indicator except on debt. And there's no way they can actually address all these issues with the debt burden that they have. So we have been taking several measures. One of them is to reduce the royalty. We reduced it from 65% in 2019. Right now it's around 40%. And we are assessing if we can potentially reduce it further. Firms in Mexico pay 33%. So Pemex should be at least trying to, we should be trying to at least reduce this tax burden for Pemex, and we have been doing it. We do consider that to be a structural change for Pemex. This has allowed Pemex to have to free around, it depends from the year and the price of oil, but it will be around 4 to almost 6 billion per year, US dollars per year. So that provides a significant cash flow for the firm. The second measures that we have do with Pemex is to conduct continuous liability management transactions together between the UMS and the SOE. And there are some specific legal constraints. So we cannot provide a warranty for Pemex, and we don't want to provide a warranty for Pemex because, I mean, we do think that Pemex being in the market induces also some kind of discipline, and on transparency in reporting, etc. So we are not thinking on providing a warranty, but we can conduct some liability management transactions allowed in our legal framework. However, I would like to put in context that Pemex is, as you all know, is facing a significant challenge in terms of cash flow in the short term, and also an increase in the differential that they pay when compared to the UMS. So we need to conduct liability financial or market transactions that allow us to compress the spread that they are paying. So that's what we have been doing for the last 5 years, and that's what we can do for the following years. Pemex is a valuable asset for the Mexican government. It provides around 500 up to 600 billion Mexican pesos per year. So we still have a significant flow, public resources flow that comes from oil extraction. And what we would like to do is to start defining structural changes. Some of those structural changes might need to go and to be authorized by Congress. We need to change some laws. There's a law specific for Pemex. There's a law for budgetary purposes in Mexico, also for debt. So we will need to change at least 5 laws in order to align a structural change that allows the Mexican government to support more firmly the Pemex debt. On the short term, well, we have the toolkit that I already described, and one of the most simple measures is just to include a budgetary line next year and just to support Pemex directly with capitalizations that can be faced with the redemptions that they have the following year. So the message that I want to send is that yes, there is financial challenges. There are significant financial challenges that Pemex is facing, but we are behind, and we will be behind, and we have an efficient toolkit to address these issues, and we are assessing also structural changes that we can pursue potentially on the next administration.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now turning to another topic, or the topic that most people are interested in talking about, right? There's a lot of talk about the geopolitical changes, the rebuilding of supply chain, and the nearshoring, friendshoring story. And obviously everyone sees Mexico as one, or if not the main beneficiary of that. So my question is, how are you thinking about the nearshoring process? Are you already seeing it? Are you seeing evidence? And how where can we find that evidence? And what are the challenges for Mexico to fully benefit from this?
Yeah, sure. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about nearshoring, because it's a very interesting issue in terms that there is no specific nearshoring indicator in our statistical system. So It can be reflected on construction, on manufacturing, on real estate, and also on financial indicators. So I will try to walk you through all these indicators because there's not a specific nearshoring monitoring in terms of our statistics. But in order to do so, I think we have to understand the nearshoring dynamics. I don't think they are clear right now, neither for Mexico or the rest of the world, what is going to be happening in terms of nearshoring. We do have some hypotheses, also because of our dialogue with some firms that have already decided to be established in Mexico, especially one that I personally participate myself was on the Tesla decision to be relocated in northern Mexico, in the state of Nuevo León, in Monterrey. And there are some specific decisions that they take and some specific characteristics that they assess before taking the decision. One is proximity to United States. It seems like nearshoring is not going to be like a deglobalization. Practically what is firms seems to prefer to continue having access to all the markets. It's not that they are going to sacrifice one market or other markets. So, for example, in the case of Tesla, they didn't want to sacrifice market access to Asia, but they want to continue having market access to United States, Latin America, and also Europe. So that's one of the decisions why they wanted to be in Mexico, because of the proximity to United States, proximity to Europe as well, and Latin America. Second is the labor market. It's not specifically labor cost. For example, some firms, they will still be paying the same wages that they pay in the United States. It's more like the qualification of the job. Obviously, there's some labor is cheaper in Mexico, but it's not like the main driver. Also, they are not requiring fiscal incentives. At the beginning, we thought they will be asking for fiscal incentives. Even though they are not actively requiring fiscal incentives, we will provide some of them because we agree in the high-level dialogue space that we have with the United States to focus on 5 sectors, which would be microchips, pharmaceutical, electronics, cars or transport, and aerospatial. So we will be providing some specific fiscal incentives that aim to increase the rate of return of the firms that are relocating in Mexico. But let me get into the details and what we are experiencing already. Mexico, again, for the benefit of the audience, we have like 2 Mexicos. Southern Mexico practically is not connected to the rest of the country. So that's one of the reasons why Southern Mexico is diverging in terms of economic growth. But Northern Mexico is highly industrialized, manufacturing. We have a center corridor that is focused more on e-commerce, also logistics. So what is happening right now with nearshoring is that the firms are deciding to be established on this already traditional economic or manufacturing clusters. So what this will bring is that a high interest and demand for land in these specific areas. What we have, information that we have is prices of rents, leasings, building, expanding industrial parks in northern Mexico are increasing, especially in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Ciudad Juárez in Chihuahua, and also Tijuana in Baja California. And they are preferring this because obviously we have a lot of infrastructure for trade facilitation and to access United States. The second indicator that we have seen is also the demand for energy infrastructure. Mexico does not have a problem in terms of energy. There's a lot of noise that some firms are not able to find energy or electricity. That's not the case. 80% of all our demand practically at this point it represents around 80% of all the generation that we have. So what we do need to do is some investments in the margin. For example, we have new industrial parks, so we need to provide a new substation or to invest in transmission lines. Let me get into another topics that we are foreseeing. Demand for housing is increasing in these specific economic or industrial clusters. Also, there's a huge increase in commercial loans in these specific areas, in the center corridor and also in northern Mexico. Banks have been reporting that commercial loans have been increasing more in northern Mexico than in central Mexico City, for example, comparing. And then there are some specific measures some specific reforms that we need to pursue. Some of these firms want to be relocated here because of the infrastructure. Telecommunications is also one of the requirements that they have. we need to address some preponderacy, some competition issues that we have in the communication sector. Specifically, when we talk about the spectrum, some of the firms need some closed circuits in order to conduct their processes. So it is a reality. We are seeing all this. I don't want to call them anecdotal evidence because it's already reflected in prices. But we do see also that in the overall, practically part of Mexico's growth right now is because of foreign direct investment that is coming from nearshoring. Just to close, maybe this my response here is that I mean, Latin America is away or is far away from the geopolitical conflicts that are in East Europe and also in Asia. So there's a lot of Asian investment in Latin America that will also bring FDI to the region. And there is also a lot of free investment from United States firms in Mexico. We are far away from this geopolitical tension, so probably Latin America is going to be benefiting a lot from nearshoring. But Mexico practically is expecting to capture half of these flows that potentially can come to Latin America because of these characteristics and proximity to the largest market. Just to finish here, that's one of the reasons we are conducting infrastructure investments in southern Mexico, because nearshoring is expected to increase inequality in our region. So we need to connect our southern part with or southern country with the productive network that we have. And that's one of the reasons we are developing 10 industrial parks in southern Mexico, specifically in the corridor that goes from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. That means that all the commercial flow that goes from Asia to the East Coast of the United States and that cannot go to the Panama Channel because of there are some Panama boats that need to go around the continent. That flow can potentially be passing from the Istmo de Tehuantepec corridor. And that's, if we manage to capture a particular flow, we will be able to develop southern Mexico and to connect it to the rest of the country in terms of growth and development.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. And so my last question is on the other topic that is in the minds of a lot of people, and I know it's also very, very dear to your hearts, which has to do with environmental policy, ESG, in general terms, but more specifically in terms of finance and in financial innovation in that sense. And I know that you are driving that process in the Mexican administration. So what are your plans in terms of incorporating these ESG principles into broader macroeconomic policy, but specifically as well into finance and financing?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, this is a very important issue for the Ministry of Finance. In 2020, we issued our first sustainable sovereign bond in Europe. It is a bond that is linked to the Sustainable Development Goals of the UNDP. So we elaborated a framework that is recognized. It has the most international standard for green, social, and sustainable bonds issuances at the international markets. We have already tapped all our liquid markets, like the Samurai market, the euros. Also, we have been issuing or developing new asset class denominated in Mexican pesos, Bondes G, and also the Bono S. In the next weeks, we are going to issue the fixed rate bond, sustainable bond in Mexican pesos. But beyond that, what we are aiming is that any project that pursue either a climate change objective, environmental objective, biodiversity, but also social objectives, should find at least one source of funding in our local market. And that means that we need to develop our fixed income market or develop our sustainable debt market. That's how we put it here in Mexico. That means that, the sovereign has a role in market development. So we are putting all these references in international and local markets, developing the zero risk instrument that will be used to price corporate issuances. But we're also working on the financial regulation. What we want is to green the Mexican financial sector. So we already publish or make public for discussions for local discussions what we call the sustainable taxonomy, This taxonomy aims to reduce greenwashing, social washing, or social washing. So it means that it will increase the quality of our asset class here in Mexico, either for any issuer. Also, we're working on the supply and demand side with the pension funds. They're incorporating ESG criteria when they take some investment decisions with the insurance companies. So practically with all the financial sector, we have a very nice sustainable finance agenda. We are entering in a phase in which we need to put this in regulation. Otherwise, we don't have the enough enforcement for these efforts. So, but we will do it with very close with the financial sector. So we're not putting just regulation there. We need to be very careful and responsible on this. But we will do it in this way. We're working together with the central bank as well, and also with our development banks. In this moment, I would like to say that Mexico practically has a significant amount outstanding in terms of sustainable debt or sustainable asset class. And we will bring this into regulation. What we want is that the financial sector, specifically the banks and insurance companies, take a major or a key role either when they are taking investment decisions or when they are defining financial services, insurances, green mortgages, etc. So what we want is to mobilize, or at least to voluntarily invite the financial sector to devote more resources to these specific issues, ESG, but specifically in climate change and social issues. And social issues does not mean poverty, but for example, our taxonomy has a very, we incorporated a public good, or we want this to be a public good, which is not only to focus or to measure on mitigation and adaptation actions, but also gender equality. So we'll be able to track if any economic activity in Mexico has a contribution to gender equality. And the gender bonds, local gender bonds in Mexico, the gender bond markets has been developing very fast as well. So we already have around 3 gender issuances. For a fourth one, it's from an international NDB that issued in Mexican pesos. So practically in a nutshell is what we are trying to do. We are also planning to develop the carbon market and other initiatives, and this in this administration, which is kind of entering in the last phase, in the transition phase. We might not have the time, but maybe on next administration, or at least we will leave these proposals on the table.
Excellent. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Gabriel. And we've run out of time, but I really want to thank you for participating, for the information, for waking up that early. I know everyone is very grateful, and so thank you very much. And we'll move on to the next session. Thank you very much, Gabriel.
No, thanks to you. Ciao.